Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Morgan Crossman, and I'm the Executive Director at Building Bright Futures. And I'm really excited to talk with you today about the early childhood system in the state of Vermont. I also want to talk a little bit about my career trajectory and why I'm really excited about children and families and how we work as an early childhood system to support children and families in the state of Vermont. So for today's lecture, I will talk a little bit about the importance of the early childhood period. I'll also talk about Building Bright Futures' role in the state of Vermont, and talk a little bit about some of the really exciting and important documents that have been created over the last year that tell us about how children and families are doing. Some of those documents are the Early Childhood Needs Assessment, Vermont's Early Childhood Action Plan, and the 2020 How Are Vermont's Young Children and Families Report. I will also touch on a new venture for Building Bright Futures called Vermont's Early Childhood Resource Data and Policy Center, as well as the 2020 State Advisory Council recommendations. And so just that snapshot gives you a little bit of a sense of the type of work Building Bright Futures does for Vermont's kids and families. But before I jump into those things, I do want to give a little bit of information on my career trajectory and why I'm really interested in being in this field. So I can start by saying that right now I am the mom of a 3.5-year-old daughter who is in pre-K and private childcare in the state of Vermont. But before I have gone into my own ventures of being a mom and supporting a young child in Vermont, I started as far back as I can remember working one-on-one with children, both in terms of a babysitting capacity, but then as I went into my professional career through my college ventures, I was a respite care provider, a home-based worker. I worked in a pre-kindergarten education classroom for a little while, and was really interested in how children and families have access to what they need to be able to support optimal development outcomes. And over the course of my both undergraduate education, but then as I transitioned into a master's program, was really interested in whether or not the services we provide to families impact their well-being and optimal outcomes for kids. So I started being really interested in research. So my master's degree is in applied developmental and educational psychology, which is really about child development and human development. And my research in that way was really looking at early intervention and whether or not early intervention services impact children and families within the 0 to 3 time period and how we support optimal well-being for those families. And as I got deeper and deeper into the research, one of the things that I realized is that research can only take us so far, but how do we actually use that research to impact service provision and policy? So how do we use our knowledge of how service provision takes place and what outcomes are for kids and families to actually improve? And so I pursued a PhD in social policy, primarily focused in child and family policy and disability policy. And when I finished that degree, I, over the course of that time, had been working with partners at Boston Children's Hospital. And I pursued even one step further, a research fellowship at Harvard Med and Mass General Hospital, really looking at service provision over time for children and families. It was called the Harvard-wide Pediatric Health Services Research Fellowship. So it was really looking at, again, this broad system of services and what we know about what children and families have access to at what periods of time over their life course from the prenatal period through age 22, and really understanding how we support families in navigating those transitions. So I've always been really interested in, again, how do we support kids and families? And another piece of this trajectory that I haven't mentioned yet is that I also was a faculty member at a couple of different places where I would teach, both at Boston University School of Public Health and Boston College, teaching some courses on advocacy, on what we know about the status of children and families, or families of children with autism spectrum disorder, and how their well-being changes over the life course. I also taught a course on navigating early childhood and family mental health. So a lot of really relevant relevant positions and opportunities coming into this role as the executive director at Building Bright Futures. And I was really excited about the opportunity to come back to my home state, to Vermont, to be able to raise my, at that point, 2-year-old daughter. So both my husband and I are residing currently in Heinsberg and really loving this new opportunity. And I'm really excited about the partnerships over the past year and a half in terms of the early childhood arena and supporting kids and families. All right, so many of you have heard over the course of your learnings in this past year about child development, about the early childhood period. So what I'm going to talk about now is not new to anyone, but what we know from the research is that in the first years of life, the first 3, the first 5, there are some critical periods of child development that are happening. So we're seeing sensory pathways come online, so vision, hearing, language, and even the premise, that start of higher cognitive function and brain development. So we're seeing, millions of synapses forming in this first period of life. And it's really, really critical for us to be focused on how we work towards prevention and really supporting optimal development outcomes from the start for children and families. So that's that visual on the left. What you're seeing on the right is a way that we think about a child in the context of the broader system. So when we talk about early childhood and we talk about supporting children, we see them at the center of everything that we do. And what we know is that the child is situated within the broader family context. So you're seeing the family in that next layer of this infrastructure. We also see the family as nested within the broader community. So looking at that figure on the right, we're looking at an ecological systems framework for how we think about child development. And so when we talk about the community, we're talking about all the different services, resources, and supports that are there to provide opportunities for children and families. And then at the outermost layer, it's the broader system. And that's where we're talking about local and state early childhood policy programs, the key decisions that happen to support children and families over time. So what is Building Bright Futures' role in all of this work? So what you're seeing in this visual is on the left, the 5 key mandates that Building Bright Futures has. So within Vermont's early childhood system, Building Bright Futures is mandated to be the public-private partnership holding the foundation of the early childhood system as Vermont's Early Childhood State Advisory Council. And so within that mandate under Vermont's Act 104, as well as the Federal Head Start Act, BBF maintains the vision and strategic plan for Vermont's early childhood system. Our mission in this work is to improve the well-being of all children and families in Vermont by using evidence to inform policy and bringing voices together to discuss critical challenges and problem solve. And not only, as I mentioned, do we maintain this vision for our organization, but also for the early childhood field in the state. And that vision is for the early childhood system to be an integrated, continuous, comprehensive, high-quality system of services that's equitable, accessible, and will improve outcomes for all children prenatal to age 8 and their families in the state of Vermont. So very big vision, very big action on behalf of Building Bright Futures that we hold for the state of Vermont. And to give you a sense of some of the other key components of our work, the visual on the left shows 5 different mandates. So again, we serve as a critical convener in the early childhood system, where we are bringing folks together to foster coordination, collaboration, communication, and problem solving at all layers of our infrastructure. And I'll talk about that in just a minute. Another key component of our work is monitoring the system of services. And so this is where we're asking ourselves the question continuously: how do we know whether children and families are doing well? What do we know about service provision? How do we know if we have equitable, accessible, and high quality system of services? So we are consistently using a range of mechanisms to track outcomes, to monitor service provision, and then report back to the community and our state partners. A key part of our role that we don't talk about as often, that we're working to really elevate in this next year, is empowering families and communities. And so we, at each layer of our infrastructure, we are working to provide different opportunities for our families and communities to lead and to elevate their needs. Another key mandate here is responding. And so primarily this happens within regions, but also at the state level, where we are convening and bringing folks together, but then responding to fill gaps and identifying the needs of children and families at the regions and systems level, and identifying really neat and innovative mechanisms for how we respond. And that may vary across the state within different regions. Our final mandate is advising. And so, as I mentioned before, we serve as the State Advisory Council on Early Childhood, which means that we are the primary advisor to the governor and the legislature on the current status of children and families in the state of Vermont. And that takes place in a range of different ways, and you'll hear about some of them in a few minutes. All right, so that previous slide was really an overview of the type of work we do, but I also think it's really critical to talk about how that work happens. And so in the state of Vermont, we have the organization Building Bright Futures, and our team at BBF is only about 10 to 13 people on a really good day. But when we talk about Building Bright Futures, it's actually this very broad early childhood network infrastructure that has over 300 plus members. And so what you're seeing in the visual on the left is that all of our work, as I mentioned before, focuses on kids and families. And then on that x-axis, we are committing to using evidence and data to inform policy and service provision. So at the very base of this pyramid, what you see in the bright pink box is that we have 12 regional councils. So across the state of Vermont, we have folks within regions who are coming together on a monthly basis to identify the gaps, the barriers, the challenges that children and families face. And they're the ones that are developing the innovative strategies within regions to meet the needs of kids and families. The next layer of the infrastructure is ECAP committees, and these are early childhood action plan committees. So again, for the state of Vermont, Building Bright Futures holds the vision and the strategic plan, the Vermont Early Childhood Action Plan. And a part of that action plan is having 7 different committees monitor whether or not we're doing a great job and where we've made progress and where we still have some barriers and challenges to overcome. The next layer of this infrastructure is the State Advisory Council. And that includes 23 public and private partners who are coming together to discuss really big statewide challenges, opportunities for future improvement in different existing policies and programs. We identify priorities on an annual basis, and then we make recommendations for how to move the field forward. And this group, again, is that primary advisory body for the governor and the legislature. The next layer is the interagency coordinating team. And that group is made up of the public members from the State Advisory Council. So those are our state agency partners that serve on the State Advisory Council that we like to call the SAC. And that group is charged with bringing back to their leadership everything they've heard at all of the previous levels of this infrastructure. They are the ones that are charged with cross-agency and interagency alignment and coordination, and making sure we have that shared vision from our state agency partners. At the top of this infrastructure is policymakers. These are the decision makers. It's the governor, it's the legislature, it could be state agency secretaries. And the purpose of having an infrastructure like this is so that you can see in this, the circular vision around it, that we can escalate the barriers, the challenges, the priorities, we can make recommendations. And then as the policy and decision makers are putting out policies or setting priorities and guidance, we have an infrastructure that we can implement this work back through. So again, at all levels, we are really working to use evidence and data to inform service provision, and this infrastructure provides that mechanism of accountability. I've mentioned a couple of times the regional council infrastructure, and in the state of Vermont, this is such a unique group, or a unique series of groups that come together across the state of Vermont and have a presence in every single corner of the state. So we have 12 regional councils. And when we look at this map on the left-hand side, this visual is there to show folks, where there's alignment in some of the challenges and priorities that folks are focusing on within regions, and also where there's regional variation. So some of the things that you'll see here is there's a lot in the areas of food insecurity, basic needs, access to services and supports, family resilience, family safety and mental health. So there are themes that come up over the course of the year that we really work hard to both identify the unique regional variation, but then elevate all of the different ones where we're seeing across the state similar patterns. And so again, I think what's critical for folks to know about this regional council infrastructure is that it gives folks the opportunity to come together within regions to identify the gaps, to identify resources, and to leverage those resources. It also allows folks to share information, to share resources, to share priorities across sectors, right? So in our regional council network infrastructure, we see over 250 individuals come together across the state on a monthly basis across over 26 unique sectors. Another area that really speaks to our 5 charges is that these regional councils really allow for the ability to elevate regional and family voice. And then again, be the folks on the ground that are working with families or are the families who can respond to meet the needs of the specific regions. I do want to transition a little bit away from some of the infrastructure work of Building Bright Futures and show a few of the most recent publications and key ways that we meet our legislative mandates in terms of the monitoring and advising components of our work. So what you're seeing on the screen right now is the 2020 Early Childhood Needs Assessment. And this is actually a key component under our mandates that we host and conduct a periodic needs assessment for the state of Vermont. Generally, this work is an unfunded mandate. So for folks who are not as familiar with the funding of Building Bright Futures, only $244,000 is allocated to Building Bright Futures from the state of Vermont. So as a public-private partnership, we are required to have both public and private dollars alongside corporate sponsorships and federal grant dollars and grant writing. But only 18% of that money comes from the public investment side. So on an annual basis, as we're thinking about conducting periodic needs assessments, updating and holding this vision and strategic plan for the state of Vermont, those are things that we are grant writing for consistently. That is not a part of what we are generally funded to do within our infrastructure. And so what you're seeing here on the right-hand side is the one-page executive summary for Vermont's Early Childhood Needs Assessment from 2020. And so this document was a very collaborative effort across a range of early childhood partners across, again, over 28 sectors actually for the needs assessment. Information from the needs assessment was collected through both focus groups, but also a survey that went out to the field, in addition to reviewing 18 source documents that have been put together from a range of partners in Vermont for the last 5 years. And that's how we developed the themes associated with this needs assessment. I want to call your attention to a couple of key points up in this upper right quadrant of the screen, which is that in terms of themes, one of the key things to pull out is the lack of funding. So what we know about the early childhood system is that there is chronic underfunding across all of our different sectors, and that drastically impacts the quality of supports and resources that we can produce for families and in supporting families. I also think it's important to note that when we looked at workforce and when we asked the field about workforce, only 2% of early childhood stakeholders reported that the workforce has the resources necessary to meet the needs of children and families. The third piece of data that I'll pull out here, and this came through in every single theme, is that Vermont collects a tremendous amount of data, but it does not readily have the data available that leaders need to make decisions about investment, resources, and strategies in one easily accessible place. So again, we are collecting a lot of data, and in many cases, it's not the data we need to be collecting to understand how services impact families and whether families have what they need. So I highly suggest you take a look at this document. It does live in the BBF webpage under publications. It has a navigation pane through the table of contents where if you click on any component of that table, it'll bring you directly to that section. I highly suggest that because it's an 80-page document. This is a very robust look at what the status of kids and families has been over the last 5 years and how we need to be looking at this data in order to move forward. So where are the opportunities for improvement? Where do we need additional investment in the system? Within each of the 8 themes, and that's actually the next slide, within each of these 8 themes here, there is a section that talks about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. So this iteration of the needs assessment is really interesting because COVID did come in as we were developing this. So there is a call out for how the pandemic has impacted children and families in each of these 8 categories. The next really exciting document that we've put together for the state of Vermont is Vermont's Early Childhood Action Plan. So again, Building Bright Futures holds that vision and strategic plan for the state of Vermont. And every 5 years, we update that vision and strategic plan. So this happens to be the 2020 iteration, also very much so capturing the impact of COVID within this strategic plan. So the covers on the left, all of the photos that you're seeing on the left-hand side are Vermont kids and families, which is really exciting. In addition to this year's report, the other exciting addition is on the right-hand side, and that is this new framework for how we talk about the VCAP. And so I mentioned this framework, the ecological systems framework, right in my introduction about how we think about optimal outcomes for kids and child development trajectories. And so what we did is take the 4 goals that the state of Vermont has for kids and families, and we mapped them to this ecological framework. So what you're seeing at the very bottom is that on the bottom left is that goal 1 is that all children have a healthy start. And that maps to the child layer of the infrastructure. Goal 2 is that families and communities play a leading role in children's well-being. And that maps to both the family context, but also the community context. And in this year's iteration of the VCAP, Goal 2 really focuses on building family and community resilience in addition to providing opportunities for families and communities to play a leadership role. Goal 3 is that all children and families have access to high quality opportunities that meet their needs, and that maps to the community level. And then goal 4 is that the early childhood system will be integrated, well-resourced, and data informed, and that maps to the systems layer. What you're seeing across the bottom, and I think, oh, I'm missing that slide. What you're seeing across the bottom of this framework is that when we talk about the early childhood system in the state of Vermont, we're talking about the prenatal period through 3rd grade. And that's really important because oftentimes when folks say early childhood, they may mean 0 to 5, they may mean 0 to 3 or 3 to 5. And we like to be very explicit that we are actually talking about a much longer trajectory of child development from the prenatal period through 3rd grade. Another exciting iteration of the VCAP for this year is that every single goal has a committee, or at least one committee, that is charged with monitoring outcomes of this framework. So every single VCAP committee is both public and private. In terms of the partners that come to the table. And these are volunteer committees. These are also open to the public. So we highly encourage folks interested in any of these areas to join these different committees. And at the end of my slide deck, there is information about the Building Bright Futures website, as well as my contact information if you're interested in joining any of these committees. But again, what's really exciting is that each of these committees is tasked with monitoring outcomes and indicators associated with each of these 4 goals. This next slide is another iteration of work that has been long-standing at Building Bright Futures. So many of you may be familiar with a website called Vermont Insights, which was a publicly accessible data platform that Building Bright Futures maintained. And what we've heard over the course of the last few years is that both the legislature, our public and private partners have said there is no centralized place for all of the data, for all of the resources, for the information on early childhood in the state of Vermont. And so to respond to that need, Building Bright Futures has now created, and it will be live in January 2021, Vermont's Early Childhood Resource Data and Policy Center. And this is a very iterative process. So this is not going to be a one-time, here's all the information. it will consistently be evolving based on the needs, the status of kids and families in the state of Vermont. But a part of what you will find on this platform is a data dashboard for all of the indicators and the outcomes that are associated with Vermont's Early Childhood Strategic Plan, our VCAP. So there will be that dashboard. It will be very easily navigated through this new platform. It'll also have a range of resources for families, communities, professionals, the legislature, in order to understand the status of kids and families in the state of Vermont and to understand what's available and where we still have gaps. It'll also have data that is both from national sources and also our agency partners. So Vermont specific data. There will be data spotlights and then policy recommendations and briefs that come out that are really there to provide an opportunity for folks to say, okay, here's how we use data to actually inform service provision and policy. Another section of the website will include reports and publications from Building Bright Futures and from all of our partners across the system. So they may be agency reports as well as our community partner reports. An exciting iteration of the work that we're about to embark on in the next few months is the development of early childhood grand rounds. So this is not something that is currently in place, but similar to what our medical partners have in terms of pediatric grand rounds, we feel like it's really important that other folks in the early childhood arena have the opportunity to hear from local experts, from national experts on the current research on kids and families, what we know about child development, what we know about best practices nationally, and bring folks together to have the opportunity to hear about those things, to share information, to strategize. It may be an opportunity to elevate regional innovation and think about how we disseminate that across the state of Vermont in different ways. And finally, this new center will also have a portal for stakeholders to ask key questions. So they could ask whether or not specific data exists or questions about existing data. They can make recommendations for data that is missing or report data gaps as well as priorities. As I mentioned, one key component of this center is actually visualizing data associated with Vermont's Early Childhood Action Plan. So what you're seeing is a very broad mock-up of what you will find when you come to the center website. And if you're looking at some of the action plan goals, you'll see a different section for each of the 4 goals. You'll see a little bit more information about what those goals are, what they mean for the system, and how we're measuring success. So for every single goal, you will see a range of indicators. Some examples are down on the bottom right. So reducing the percent of low birth weight infants, the percent of children reading at 3rd grade, the percent of children reading at grade level by 3rd grade, the number or percent of children experiencing homelessness and those who are flourishing. So again, thinking about a snapshot across all of the different early childhood sectors, what do we know about the current status of children and families in the state of Vermont? And each of these will be both able to be visualized individually as individual indicators, but then also you can look across all of these different groupings to see on the whole, how are we doing? What do we know about the status of kids and families related to each of these 4 goals? So really exciting iteration of this data system. Another key way that we meet our monitoring and advising mandate in the state of Vermont is the annual publication for How Are Vermont's Young Children and Families. And so again, this is another document that's coming in a few weeks, so January 2021. And what you're seeing here is 3 different pages for what you can expect. On the left, you're seeing the cover for How Are Vermont's Young Children and Families. We have done a really interesting iteration of this report where we've really tried to highlight the different factors that have impacted kids and families in the state of Vermont this year, including the COVID-19 pandemic and Vermont's recommitment to addressing systemic injustice and racism. So you will see call outs for both of those components. There's also a COVID-19 spotlight. So really, again, trying to say, here's what we know about the status of children and families during the pandemic, and here's how that may or may not map to our existing data on children and families. The second visual that you're seeing right here is a new way that we are capturing state advisory council recommendations. And I'll go through those with you in just a second, but on an annual basis, the state advisory council makes a series of recommendations. Usually there are two, but again, given the number of factors of challenges that families and kids have faced this year, there are five recommendations coming out of the State Advisory Council. Each of them has their own dedicated page in this year's report. These will also be accessible as one-pagers. So the example here is empowering family voice to rebuild a stronger system. And we will have a photo of one of our parent ambassadors from our regional councils as well. But this is really a really nice visual for folks to be able to use to advocate on behalf of children and families. So there's a section there about why it matters. There's the two recommendations. And on this one, there's also a quote, which I really want to take a moment to say. This is from a parent ambassador that we've had on board at the Building Bright Futures for the last year. And it says, "This is the one place I feel my voice is heard and it matters." And that was in reference to the Families and Communities Committee that Building Bright Futures hosts. The last visual on this slide is a snapshot of the health section of the report, and it's pre and postnatal health. And so again, just to give you a sense of what to expect when you're looking at this report, there are narratives, there are call out boxes for important statistics, and there are visuals, both graphically and numerically, that you'll see in terms of this report. And as I mentioned, this year's State Advisory Council recommendations, there were 5 different buckets, and these will be available on the Building Bright Futures website, but also published in the report, which will be open to the public again in January 2021. So the 5 different buckets are: 1, to recognize Vermont's early care and education system and workforce as essential; 2, to mitigate COVID impacts on family economic stability and mental health; 3, to recognize chronic inequities and racism as a public health crisis; 4, to empower family voice and rebuild a stronger system; and 5, to evolve our data system to address gaps. And I won't go into each of the different series of sub recommendations that come under these 5 buckets, but I suggest that you go to the Building Bright Futures website to review these one-pagers and see how these are aligned with the work across the entire early childhood arena, but also how they map to Vermont's early childhood strategic plan and what layer or level of that infrastructure we're looking to impact and create change. All right, so the last slide I have is really my contact information and where you can go for additional information. So I am really honored that Deb and others across the state have asked me to come and give this lecture about the importance of early childhood and the infrastructure that we have in the state of Vermont to meet the needs of children and families. It's been an incredible year and a half that I've had the opportunity to serve as Building Bright Futures Executive Director and to lead Vermont's Early Childhood State Advisory Council. If you have any questions or are looking to be involved in different layers of this infrastructure, please email me. And please take a look at our website. You can find way more information than what I presented today, but that website is buildingbrightfutures.org. And then coming, and not until January 2021, is our new Early Childhood Resource Data and Policy Center. And that webpage is vermontkidsdata.org. So I really appreciate your time today, and I hope to hear from all of you. Again, please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions.